Hi, I'm Stephanie Coleman. I am the Senior Manager of Education and Engagement at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History and Sea Center, and welcome to Science Pub. Joining us tonight, we have David Gomberg. He is a Southern California native who received his master's degree from UCLA in atmospheric sciences. David has worked his entire career at the National Weather Service Los Angeles Oxnard office and is currently a senior forecaster. Dave also leads fire weather program at his office, and he helps to facilitate relationships and deliver critical fire weather information to local fire agencies, emergency management partners. David, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, first of all, for the invite. We really appreciate it. We always want to have an opportunity to get our word out to the public and to our core partners. And this all came about from Sabina Thomas, one of the community college instructors there at Santa Barbara City College, who Todd Hall, one of my colleagues at the office, has built a tremendous program, a partnership with all the community colleges in Southern California. And Sabina has utilized us to teach some of these weather classes to her class, as well as some of the other colleges around here. So a big shout out to Todd Hall from the office. He really was instrumental in building these relationships. And then also joining us today, my other colleagues are Kristen Stewart at the office, as well as Kristen Lund and Lisa Phillips, all of which have their contact information as well. So if you have additional questions for us, one of us would be glad to help you out. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And so tonight's talk, of course, is we're going to talk about how our National Weather Service office in Los Angeles Oxnard helps support fire weather services and public safety. So we're kind of going to give you a behind the scenes. Let me see here. Okay, there we go. So today's topics, we're going to give you kind of a background. I know everyone is very familiar with the importance of the fire agencies in the local community, but we're going to hopefully give you some ideas of the behind the scenes information and the relationships of how important that is between the weather service and our fire agencies and the emergency management community. So we're going to talk about the products and services we provide, give you a little background on red flag warning information. And our most critical fire weather pattern, of course, are the Sundowner winds, and how you can actually utilize some of this information and retrieve it, not only you as the general public, but also how the fire agencies retrieve this critical fire weather information. And then finally, a very critical part of our agency right now is decision support services. So as far as our main products and services, kind of the backbone of what we provide to the fire agencies, first of all, as the top part says, the NWS provides critical decision support services to fire agencies through our fire weather forecast, our watch warning program, and direct decision support. So why is this important? Well, you probably never really thought about all the behind the scenes information before the weather event occurs. That's where all this communication takes place. This is where the fire agencies have to plan their different resources and strategically place their equipment and fire personnel for rapid initial attack. Because we all know it's that first hour or two that can make or break whether the fire is going to be contained, slowed down, or is going to explode. So the more strategically we can get the information to them and they can plan their resources and staffing accordingly, that's the end result that we're shooting for. So the basic products that we issue is first kind of a general fire weather planning forecast that we issue twice a day during our high fire season, which of course we're in right now. We also provide what's called a trend forecast, which what you need to know is it's a point-based forecast for these RAWS observation sites. I'm going to talk to you more of the importance of these observation stations, but keep in mind for right now that not only do we produce a general zone fire weather planning forecast, but we also provide these more point-based forecasts for selected observation sites within the community. Third is spot weather forecast. So think about anytime a wildfire breaks out, or they're planning a prescribed burn, or let's say there's a hazmat chemical spill, or a large public event gathering, the fire agencies can request that spot forecast, a precision point-based forecast for that location. Next would be our red flag warnings and fire weather watch. And keep in mind that there's a difference between the issuance time of those warnings and watches versus the valid time. So remember, our goal is always to get the information out ahead of time. So we may be issuing that warning 24 hours in advance of the actual red flag conditions. And finally, the incident deployment program. Okay, Rich Thompson, who's been our longtime National Weather Service IMET incident meteorologist, not only serving the fires here in Southern California, but also, for instance, he's on the Dixie Fire right now up in Northern California. So he could be dispersed to almost anywhere in the country, but they try to specifically focus his talents here in California. And finally, other meteorologists, the people that I mentioned to you before, any of us would be available also for on-site deployment for other incidents. So it may not be a full-fledged large-scale fire, but let's say it's that first day of when a fire breaks out and the fire agency would like to request a meteorologist on site to give them specific support. We also provide that as well. So to give you a kind of an understanding of our fire weather forecast, first you have to know about our fire weather zones. So if you were to look here in Santa Barbara County where my arrow is, you can see these different subdivisions, and those are called geographical zones. So the importance of that is each one of those zones gets its own unique fire weather forecast. And also when we issue red flag warnings, they are zone based. So we don't blanket the entire county under red flag warning. We pick which one of these zones actually is going to hit the necessary red flag criteria. So for instance, in Santa Barbara County, we have these different zones. So you have here at the bottom, the Santa Barbara South Coast, where you guys are. Up above that is the Santa Barbara Mountains, the Santa Ynez Valley, the Central Coast, and the Kiama Valley. Those are the 5 zones for Santa Barbara. And then at the very bottom here, you can see that the red flag warning, again, most of the time will be for the entire zone, but sometimes if we know it's just going to be for part of the zone, we can be more specific, like in this example, that says it's going to be just for the foothills of the Santa Barbara South Coast. So looking at the definition of these fire weather watches and red flag warnings, that's one of the main takeaways I want to leave you tonight, is to understand what a watch and warning is. And first, by definition, it's really issued for critical fire weather patterns conducive to extreme fire danger and/or fire behavior. So sometimes people think that there's different criteria for watches and warnings, but the criteria is actually the same for both. The difference is all about lead time and confidence. Okay, so at the bottom, you can see fire weather watch. We like to think of that as that you have at least 50% confidence that red flag conditions are going to occur. Typically, I would say in a 2 to 3 day time period from now. When that confidence level increases to say 80% or above, then we would upgrade that watch to a warning. And typically our desired lead time for a red flag warning is 24 hours in advance. A couple other key points here. Second bullet, number 2 here, must have sufficiently dry fuels. Okay, obviously right now the vegetation is extremely dry, so we definitely hit that threshold. In the spring and fall months where it's kind of a transition, that's where it gets a little bit more challenging. And we'll talk more about that later. And this third point is very important. Just because we issue a watch or warning, that does not necessarily mean it's a predictor of fire starts. We're just saying that if a fire were to ignite, then these are the kind of weather patterns that could cause rapid fire spread and dangerous fire behavior. So here's an example of this interaction between the Weather Service and the fire agencies, specifically in terms of fuel moisture. So even though we all know that the weather conditions play a very vital part to fire spread, also the dryness of the fuels is very important. And this is an example of what the Santa Barbara County Fire sends us, usually every couple weeks, of the different points. Each one of these colors represents a different site across the county. And what you're looking at is something called live fuel moisture, or basically the moisture in the live part of the vegetation. And the higher the number, as you see in the spring months, we're here where it kind of dips upward, that's after the winter rainfall. And that's the typical diurnal spike upward in the spring when everything greens up. And then you can see the rapid decline because of that lack of rainfall this year. You can see that they really bottomed out faster than normal. The red line shows you the historical average. And here we are already at this critical 60% threshold for most of our sites here. So then the question becomes, you hear this in the news all the time about red flag warning. So what is the actual criteria? And keep in mind, criteria could be different for different regions. So what works in Southern California, up in Northern California, it can be a different criteria. But for us, first criteria is when you have winds, sustained winds 25 miles an hour or greater, and or gusts 35 miles an hour or greater, that has to overlap with a relative humidity of 15% or less. That's kind of like the gold standard of red flag warnings that many offices use. And the duration of that wind and relative humidity have to overlap for a duration of 6 hours or more. Okay, so that's important. If we're only expecting a few hours, like a sundowner, like a quick burst that happens just for a few hours, then we would call that brief critical fire weather conditions. So it still alerts the fire agencies that it's a dangerous situation, but maybe not necessarily the duration of 6 hours or more. Now, the second criteria is now when the relative humidities get bone dry down to 10% or less, now you only need sustained winds of 15 miles an hour or gusts to 25 miles an hour, again, with a duration of 6 hours or more. Third criteria is when you have a widespread or significant dry lightning outbreak. Think of that big lightning outbreak in Northern and Central California last year that caused all those devastating fires. So those are definitely one of the main triggers in the summertime. And finally, forecaster discretion. That's kind of an occasional situation where we may have to issue that don't necessarily fit these first three criteria, but could still be noteworthy. So for example, let's say you had a strong sundowner wind event that was like the T fire. Back for those of you that were in during the T fire, we knew their winds were going to be 60, 70 mile an hour wind gusts, but the relative humidity may not necessarily fall to 15%, may have been more like 20 to 25. So because the winds were so strong and the relative humidities were close to that critical 15, we would nudge that and still issue based on forecaster discretion. Okay, so then the question becomes, what can the public do? How can you be more ready? And so one of the things we want to have you take away tonight is every county puts together a Ready, Set, Go program. And that's really very important takeaway of something you want to have at your home that can help enhance your public response to wildfires. So keep in mind, in the ready state, that's before an event actually occurs. This is what you can do ahead of the curve right now. First, you can create and maintain defensible space. You can harden your home against flying embers. As you know, during these major wind events, you can get a lot of spotting of embers. Sign up for these mobile alerts, and there's the website for that. And then the SET program, okay, once you get to the SET, we would like to think that once we issue a red flag warning or a fire weather watch, this is where the public could be in that SET stage, okay? So what could you be doing at that point? Well, you could be assembling your emergency supply kit. You want to know your evacuation route and then identify the important things that you would want to take with you. And finally, that go part of it. Have important things packed in your vehicle, ready to go. Take action immediately when the wildfire strikes and evacuate if ordered by officials or if a wildfire is close by. So now in the last few years, we've become much more visible on social media. And then we know that this is another great way we can interact with the general public, the media, and our core fire agencies in getting the word out. And we work hard to put together these graphics, share critical information, not only in advance of a weather event, but also during a fire weather event. And as I mentioned before, these spot forecasts, we talked about how they can be issued for wildfires, prescribed burns, hazmat, large events. And the key thing here is that we're open 24/7. Okay, so fire agencies can reach us around the clock. We're open 365 days a year, and they can reach us anytime. We talked about the Incident Meteorologist program. So not only can they provide direct on-site support for wildfires, but also They can be there for hazmat, debris flow, or post-disaster mitigation. Think about it like after an earthquake, hurricane, or tornado. And also, once they're there, they would provide detailed spot forecast, and scheduled or on-demand briefings also be available for media requests as well. So Sundowner winds. So if you're in Santa Barbara, you all know how important that is. This is a picture of the holiday fire back in Goleta back in 2018. And first of all, what is the Sundowner wind? Well, it's kind of like Santa Barbara's equivalent of a Santa Ana wind. It's a downslope wind off the Santa Ynez Range Mountains. And because of that downsloping, just like a Santa Ana, that's what helps produce the warmer, drier conditions and helps to accelerate those stronger winds through the passes and canyons. Okay, typically, as it mentions bullet number 2 there, typically strongest in the evening hours, sometimes in certain areas can be the overnight hours. The Sundowner winds are really what produce oftentimes the damaging winds in Santa Barbara County, as well as the hot, dry conditions. And really, when you think back of the fire history, is really the primary culprit for the large fires, especially across the Santa Barbara South Coast. So when is the peak? The first peak is really in the spring and early summer from April to early July, and a second peak in the fall months. This is a depiction of something that we call pressure gradients and some of the observation sites. These are not all the observation sites, but some of the more important ones here. And the reason we kind of label these is this is really what drives our Sundowner wind events, are these pressure differences, or what we call pressure gradient. And you can see what really drives it is the one from Santa Maria SMX to Santa Barbara SBA. And you can see the direction of the wind is from the northwest direction along that pressure difference. Okay, and when we see that pressure difference to the northwest, we know that that's going to generate a stronger northwest wind event that's going to mainly impact the western parts of the South Coast, specifically from Gaviota toward Goleta. That's going to be the focus area. Whereas when the pressure difference or pressure gradient is stronger between Santa Barbara and Bakersfield, you can see that's a more northeasterly direction, and that's going to favor areas east of Santa Barbara, specifically Montecito, Carpinteria, and the foothills up above that region. Okay, so a lot of times in our forecast discussions and conference calls, we will highlight these two gradients and the differences between them, and that can help the fire agencies strategically place their resources in their appropriate areas based on these pressure gradients. Okay, so that's the first and foremost part, ingredient number 1. But ingredient number 2 and 3 are also very important. Does the event have strong upper level wind support? What we mean by that is if you think of the Santa Ynez Mountains, typically the higher peaks are about 3,000 feet. So what are the winds at the upper levels of those ridge tops? And if those winds are pretty strong up above those ridge tops, we know that a lot of that momentum could translate down toward the surface or to the urbanized areas if you have the right atmospheric conditions. So when we talk about that to the fire agencies, they're very well versed now of knowing, okay, ingredient number 1 is the pressure gradient. Ingredient number 2, they'll ask Dave, is there going to be strong upper level wind support? And the reason they want to know that is because when you have that second ingredient, that's what separates the more routine Sundowner events with your really strong and widespread events. So when you think back to the history of some of our stronger events like the Jesusita Fire and the T Fire, those were examples where you had the strong upper level wind support that really drove much stronger and more widespread events. And finally, that temperature difference. We know that the Central Coast up toward Vandenberg, Santa Maria is a lot cooler and relatively warmer across the Santa Barbara South Coast. And that sets up a temperature difference. And we'd like to look at that as a third ingredient as well. So here's just an example of the Jesusita Fire. These green lines represent isobars or lines of equal pressure, just to give you a flavor of what we're looking at. And you can see the direction of that pressure difference from higher pressure to lower pressure is a northwest direction. So this was a classic northwesterly Sundowner event that did a lot of damage, obviously, in the Jesusita Fire. And then you contrast that with the T Fire. Totally different situation where the high pressure is now over the San Joaquin Valley, lower pressure off Santa Barbara. and that drove a strong northeast pressure gradient event. And that's why the winds were so strong up above the hills of Montecito that actually had several hours of wind gusts over 70 miles an hour that night that did a very destructive fire above Montecito. So that brings us as far as how to get this information. How do the fire agencies extract that, and how is you as the general public can actually look this information up as well. And it starts with our website. If you haven't been on our website, I encourage you to go to weather.gov/Los Angeles. And a lot of information on there, but tonight we're just going to focus on 3 things. The fire weather icon at the bottom, fast page, which is kind of a nice one-stop shop designed for the media. And finally, a mobile page where you can extract a lot of the same information on your mobile device. So when you look at the fire page, draw your attention to 3 tabs here. Spot forecast, this is where the fire agencies can put in their spot forecast request. And that's where the media can also pull in. So imagine you're key news and you have a fire breaking out in Santa Barbara. You can actually go to that spot page and extract the latest spot weather forecast for that wildfire. The daily planning forecast, the red flag warning, and the trend forecast can all be found under the forecast tab. And some really handy tools that we're going to talk about that have really made a difference over the last few years for the fire agencies. And we're going to talk about those next: Fire Weather Snooper, Fire One page, and the mobile page. So when you go under tools, this is where you can pull up these various ones I'm going to talk about: Fire Weather Snooper, and the Fire Weather One page, and the mobile page. So this is a really nice development over the last few years that's really become very popular in the fire agencies. And if there's one tool I want to leave you with tonight, this is the greatest one to keep track. So if you're kind of a weather enthusiast and you want to track weather during these major events, this is the tool you want to look at, called the Fire Weather Snooper. And the idea behind it originally was, when we're in a red flag condition, the agencies, the fire agencies, and the media kind of wanted to know, well, what weather stations are actually hitting the criteria for red flag and for how many hours. And that's what this program was designed to do. So first of all, when you click the 3-button tab here in the upper right, a few things come to mind. You can pull up archive data, you can view it in a map mode, and use also a very extensive help page if you want to know more details about this tool. But for right now, I'm going to focus on these colors, okay? And you can see, first of all, the red colors are drawing your attention to weather stations that are actually hitting red flag criteria, okay? And then when you go to the duration counter here, the first number tells you how many hours you're actually hitting red flag criteria. And the second column represents how many hours you're either hitting or approaching criteria. So red means you're actually in criteria. Yellow means you are approaching criteria, okay? So that's the first function that you can look at. Second function is each one of these elements up above here, from wind to temperature to relative humidity to fuel moisture, you can sort each one of those elements. So one of the things that the forecasters do at the office behind the scenes is they're tracking where are the strongest winds currently, and where are the lowest humidities, where are the warmest temperatures, because we know those are going to be the problem areas of the day, okay? And then, okay, we talked about the sorting, we talked about the colors, and here is where you can actually click on a particular station and get a 24-hour readout. And here you can see all the different hours where it hit red, where you're hitting that red flag criteria. And remember, our red flag criteria needed an overlap of wind and humidity, okay? And then finally here, you can also display it as a map. You can see in the circled tab right here. Most of the time we have it in table format, but sometimes it's good to look at the map format, because now it really draws your attention graphically, not only where the weather stations are, but also where your problem areas are. So again, yellow means you're approaching criteria. Red means you're hitting criteria. Also notice the size of the circle. The bigger the circle, that means the higher the wind speed. So it really draws your attention very quickly to where the problem areas are going to be. And remember, when we said that weather stations are hitting criteria, the official definition of red flag warning is not just 1 hour of criteria, but a duration of 6 hours or more. So that's important to remember. There's a diurnal component as well. Okay, another great page that we put together for the fire agencies is a Fire one-stop shop for our fire partners, because they said before they used to have to go to various websites from different agencies to get information, whether it be weather or fuels, satellite, radar. Here we just put one page with all the links in one spot, and now they have it at their fingertips. Here's the mobile site. And again, just like I mentioned, a lot of the things that you can pull up on the PC off of our website are also available on the mobile site as well. And then finally, the decision support services. It's really now becoming the foundation of our agency. For many years, it was all about forecasted warnings, but now we realize that the need is to be able to communicate this information effectively to our partners. And there's no bigger partner in our area than the fire agencies. And so how do we do this? How do we communicate with our partners? It could be through specialized conference calls. We do it sometimes through live webinars. We do many email briefings for them. Sometimes it's a one-on-one direct phone call. And especially there in Santa Barbara County, we have very strong relations with Santa Barbara County Fire, Montecito, Santa Barbara City, where sometimes we'll just pick up the phone directly and talk to the operations chief. And then when needed, we can also provide that on-site support. So here's one of the most foundational parts that kind of goes on behind the scenes that you may not be aware of, is that close relationships between the Weather Service and our local fire agencies. And we do that through a conference call. So imagine before a major event, say before a Sundowner or Santa Ana wind event, we get everybody together sometimes 3, 4, 5 days in advance of this major event. And we initiate, and this is not just for Santa Barbara, this is for our whole area from LA, Ventura, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo County. And we are going to lead the call. We kind of give a weather overview of our most critical areas, but it's going to go deeper than just the actual forecast. We're going to try to get into specifics like what areas are going to be of greatest concern on a Sundowner. Is it going to be the western end? Is it going to be the eastern end? What's the timing going to be like? Is it going to affect Gaviota around 4 p.m. and perhaps Montecito around midnight? Then we're going to get into things like the marine layer inversion. You know, is this wind event just going to stay up in the foothills, or is the inversion not there and it's going to allow those winds to translate and affect the urbanized area where you all live in Santa Barbara proper? So that's the kind of detailed information that we would discuss. And again, why is this all important? Is to make their job easier and more successful in attacking those fires and having the resources at the right place and the right time effectively. So also, we give kind of the weather overview, and then the fire agencies come in and we go round robin and we talk about fuel conditions across the counties and any fire behavior concerns. And then this is a chance for them to ask their questions afterwards, get maybe more clarity on the situation. And finally, we send out a summary email of the major topics so that they have a resource at the end of the afternoon. So primarily for fire weather events, but we also do this for heavy rain when we're talking flash flood and debris flow in the wintertime, and also just strong high wind events. Second one, beside the conference call, is sometimes we just send out what are called partner emails. And this not only goes out to the fire agencies, but to all of our critical core partners. It could be emergency managers, could be the media, could be flood control agencies. And again, we're event driven. And when somebody receives this, it's because we want to mention to them something urgent is happening in our weather. Also, GoTo webinars. Sometimes if it's a big event, we want to gather everybody together, all different agencies, not just fire weather, and give them a chance to attend a live webinar where we'll go over the main topics, similar to a 1 p.m. call, but now with graphics and more of a chance for people to ask more extended questions as a result. And I should also mention what's happened too, besides our conference calls and webinars, is that Santa Barbara County Fire, for instance, if it's going to be a major red flag event, in addition to our 1 o'clock call, they will then schedule their own conference calls within the county. And then you ask, well, why would they do that if we're already doing 1 o'clock call? Well, the reason is because then they can invite all of the various city districts and various representatives within their county. So that could be like Santa Barbara City Fire, that could be Carpinteria, Montecito, Summerland, Vandenberg, Lompoc, etc. Get everybody on together. And again, same idea, we're going to give it time for the weather overview, a little bit of fuels discussion, and then finally a chance for them to ask their questions. And also, and very importantly, is then for them to discuss their strategy based on our weather briefing, how they're going to staff and prepare for the upcoming event. And then on-site decision support. So in addition to a full-fledged incident meteorologist deployment, like I mentioned, something that we're going to be moving forward with very much in the next few years is more and more meteorologists going on-site support at incident command posts or emergency operations centers, and even participating in tabletop exercises to help the agencies directly provide direct support. So as the bullets down below suggest, they be there primarily for communicating official NWS information in a face-to-face setting. They're there to support on-demand and scheduled briefings. They help provide incident action plan weather input. They're there also for media press conferences. And then I wanted to kind of wrap it all up and give you an example of how we can put this all together, an example of decision support and how our weather information can maybe help the fire agencies make a very critical decision that will hopefully provide greater safety to the community. So this was in advance of the 2018 holiday fire event that I mentioned that affected Goleta. And you can see that the holiday fire began on the evening of July 6th, okay? So if you go back in time, 5 days earlier on July 1st, that was our first mention. And we actually did a 1 o'clock fire call for the fire agencies to give them just a general heads up. Hey, this could be a major Sundowner event, and more importantly, a major heat wave. By July 2nd, we followed up with a partner email that talked about this extended heat wave and the potential for critical fire weather conditions on the 6th and 7th. And then by July 3rd, we issued a fire weather watch, again, thinking that now we have potential for red flag conditions. We followed that up in a red flag warning on July 5th to say now this is a significant heat wave with gusty winds and potential for large vertical plume fire growth. And then on July 5th at noon, I made a specific direct phone call to the Santa Barbara County Fire Operations Chief, Woody Enos, and to mention to him that this wasn't going to be just a regular red flag type event. This was an exceptional event. And conditions that really I hadn't seen since the Painted Cave fire in terms of the amount of heat that was going to be generated with this, where we were expecting temperatures in Santa Barbara itself to hit around 105 and some of the foothills to get up closer to 110 degrees. So a very major heat, a fairly strong sundowner wind, and very low humidities all coming together. So this is an example where that direct phone call can be so important, because that's what really caught his attention, was that historical comparison to a legendary fire like that. And from that, I think that really stepped it up as far as their planning. And from there, July 5th and 6th, we did additional briefings that Woody called on these specific Santa Barbara County Fire Agency coordination calls. And we now had a forum to emphasize the magnitude of this event. And then finally that fire broke out. And within the hour, I believe it was Todd Hall that actually put out the first spot request and had that really in advance. Okay, that's one of the things that we've been working on in the office the last few years, is even before the agencies request the spot, we can see it taken off on satellite. We can see it on social media, or we could see it on our big screen TVs on the media. So with all that, we can jump on the spot forecast and get it to them even sooner. And that really becomes a very important tool, because then it tells them what kind of weather conditions can they expect for the rest of the night and into the next day, and really provide them a strategy of how they're going to fight the fire. So what was the benefit of all that? Well, it could have been a very disastrous fire, to be honest. And the good news is it probably never made national news, and that's the goal. The goal really is to take a smaller fire and keep it smaller. and not a widespread destructive fire. So that's the whole point of this is decision support, is to get the right information at the right time, communicate it effectively, express a sense of urgency, and then they take the right action. And so this is an example where they implemented a mutual aid to pre-position resources before the wildfire started. Because you think of mutual aid after the fire breaks out, but here's a case where they took advantage of the information we were providing and did something that really was kind of historical for them to do this all in advance. And so the quote that Woody left us here is that the Fire Service and National Weather Service have come a long way in preparing for these major events. So that's what I want to leave you with, is that information, hopefully, that goes on behind the scenes that helps the fire agencies prepare better for these events, and then ultimately keeps the community safer as a whole. So with that, I leave you. I really appreciate the opportunity to get our word out there. I'll leave you with a few links here. Again, our website here, weather.gov/Los Angeles. We're also available on Twitter and Facebook. We're very active on Twitter and really keep a lot of good information as events are happening. And Kristen Stewart, who's actually on the call, is our social media focal point in the office and really doing a great job with that. And then finally, occasionally we do things also with YouTube as well. So that I will leave you and now open it up to any questions.
David, thank you so much for sharing all of that important information. And as you mentioned, we're coming right on to, we've already hit the threshold and we're coming into fire season. So this is really important information to share. So thank you so much. Our first question, they are already coming in. Our first question is, what can the community do to mitigate fire and spread safety awareness information more?
Sure, yeah. Well, the first takeaway, if you remember back to the slide I mentioned about the Ready, Set, Go program, really everyone, having a copy of that and really have a good understanding and have that handy, it would be number one. To have things prepared in advance, like your defensible space and hardening your roof and things like that. But also, then, having a plan, that if a fire were to break out, do you have your evacuation kit ready to go? Do you have a plan of where you're going to evacuate, where you're going to go? And then also, I just want to take this opportunity, something that you may not have thought about is a lot of times communities ask, well, what can we do to help make an investment in our community? And one of the things that I always mention is the importance of weather stations. Okay. Now, the raw station I mentioned before are owned by the fire agencies, and they're actually pretty expensive. They're about $15,000 each. But the reason those are very important is they're high quality stations that meet a certain fire weather standard. And by having those weather stations surrounding the community of Santa Barbara, it not only helps the fire agencies getting real-time weather, but we can utilize that information in real time to not only track a weather event like a Sundowner wind event, but also think of it as a short-term forecast tool. Because as soon as Santa Barbara County put more weather stations in at Gaviota and Refugio, that's my upstream information to validate what I'm seeing in the computer weather models. So now the more they put those weather stations in and start filling in those gaps and those canyons, the more we have an understanding of what is actually happening and utilizing it as a short-term forecast tool. Because we know that if we can even provide sometimes a few hours, I can give a call to the operations chief and say, hey, we've got really strong winds going on up in Gaviota and Refugio. It's going to hit Goleta here in the next 3 hours. So it can be a really great short-term tool and provide us a chance to really understand the microclimates. As we all know, those canyons are really amazing how localized those events can be, and especially based on elevation. Some areas in the foothills are getting the wind, some areas down below aren't. And the more we can understand that and then calibrate what we're seeing in our computer models, the more we can really provide a better forecast and a better warning to the community as a whole in Santa Barbara. So to make a long story short, investment in those, whether you're an agency or whether you're a homeowners group, that would be one way you can invest in your community. Is Santa Barbara Botanical Gardens is a great example of that, where they came and we worked with them and the fire agency, and we put that up there, a raw station at their site, and provides outstanding data that not only benefits us in the fire agency, but of course also benefits the gardens as well.
And the museum, since we're very close, we get all the
Oh, okay, yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah, definitely. So we have quite a few comments just saying thank you so much for the information, and the information that you'd shared with pre-planning and positions with the holiday fire really ended up saving the area. So thank you. So there's comments coming in like that. Another question though is how accurate, this is from Betsy, how accurate do you think a forecast or prediction is for the direction and strength of a wind event?
Yeah, I would say it has actually gotten quite a bit better in the last few years. And I'll tell you one of the main reasons why, two reasons. I think by having more weather stations, we have a better idea of what actually is occurring. It's not just what a computer model is saying, so it helps validate that. And as forecasters, after a while, we can look at pressure patterns and upper level patterns and start to calibrate and say, oh yeah, that Gaviota station is going to do this, or San Marcos Pass is going to do this, or Montecito Hills is going to do that. It really helps to have that weather station support to validate and work with your weather patterns. But second is the advancement of what we call high resolution computer modeling. Again, Todd has done a great job at the office to help bring that on board and customize it for our office. And that gives us great precision in terms of the detail, because these canyons are so small that the more high resolution your model data, the better it's going to capture those microclimates of those specific canyons. And not just the speed of the wind, but actually help with the timing of the wind, because that's very important as well to the fire agencies, is to know if you're going to be 12 hours off in your forecast, that's not going to work. They want it down to 2 or 3 hour time window.
Definitely. We've had a few science pubs recently that were talking about satellite imagery and the different utilizations. And so it's interesting to hear that too, and how just technology getting better and better means your data is more accurate, and therefore you can help more people. It's really fantastic. So from Charlotte Tyler, she asks, was there an early prediction for the debris flow? Explain the sequence and events for that particular time.
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is yes. We were very proud actually of the information we were able to get out. It really started unbelievably 7 days in advance, where we got the first message out that we knew that we were dealing with something potentially big. And then as the event got closer, I would say once we were about 3 to 4 days out, then it became much clearer that we were going to be dealing with a major flash flood potential. The only question was exactly where and exactly when. We knew the Thomas Fire was going to be vulnerable because all the computer models said somewhere between Santa Barbara and, say, Ventura and Ojai area, kind of in that window. That was where the models were kind of pegging the heaviest rain intensity. And we did something that we hardly ever do, is issue a flash flood watch 3 days in advance. And again, it was for all the burn areas, not just the Thomas Fire burn area, but a multitude of burns that we had that winter. But that gave you an idea of the confidence that we had and how bad this could be to put out a watch. Normally, I would say a watch is about 24 hours in advance. But the reason we wanted to do it that soon and early was for the exact reason of getting resources deployed. And it was the same idea as the fire. They did something that they had never done before. And they took some actions that were pretty remarkable. So Santa Barbara County Fire, for instance, requested a specialized swift water rescue team in advance of the event from Long Beach Fire. They also brought in special National Guard resources in advance. So they put a lot of money and effort into this to bring a lot of resources in. We felt pretty confident something was going to happen pretty big, and of course it did. Now the only question was, was it going to be exactly in Montecito, or was it going to be Park Rancheria, or was it going to be Ojai? I think that was the only question. And that's where the precision, we actually got very lucky that it could have been even a more broader area of coverage in terms of the intensity, but thank goodness that very strong cell started to dissipate as it went east toward Ojai. But as bad as it was, and definitely the worst event of our careers. The only good news out of that is they had estimated that if those actions hadn't been taken, that hundreds of people would have lost their life. Because not only of the intensity of the event, think about the timing. It was in the middle of the night between 3 and 4 in the morning. So worst possible timing as well.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Another question that we have is, what notable barriers, such as lack of weather stations in key areas, would prevent other fire operations teams across the state from undergoing that early type of preparation that you talked about with the holiday fire?
Yeah, that's another good question. Hard to speak to all the different ideas. I think we really emphasize not just the amount of data and the computer modeling, but that very important relationship building. We spend a lot of time with our pre-season meetings and really establishing strong relationships with the fire partners, especially. So every year we go out and visit them and build those relationships. So hopefully to help them understand not only the local weather patterns, but how to interpret our information. Is there anything we can be doing differently to help them, get things to them in a more timely manner, or maybe a more clearer manner? So we really pride ourselves on that part of it as well, is besides just the science part, but also the outreach and relationship part. And hopefully that all works together so that when the big events do come, that we're going to hit the big events and hopefully not have too many false alarms either, because that's important too. We don't want to blow the whistle too many times and not have something happen. So that all kind of works together, and yeah. So I mean, I just hope other offices can help kind of adopt similar types of approaches to that.
Yeah, you made a good point that that just kind of stuck out in my head, was that your reputation is key, right? So the percentage of the time that it's a boy crying wolf kind of situation, yep, versus not, that's really important to those relationships.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of goes into what we call the social science and the evacuation fatigue, where people, if you evacuate them too often, then when it really needs to be done, they're like, oh, I don't want to leave. I've already had to leave too many times. So that's why it becomes very important to really, not have too many false alarms as well.
Dave, your colleagues are showing a little love, saying, so Todd's saying that the credit goes all to you for building those relationships with the fire agencies. You spent over a decade doing this. So thank you so much for all of that good work. We all benefit from your impact. So thank you.
Well, thanks. And thanks, Todd.
Let's see, last one. Oh, just another comment saying great in depth. Thank you so much. Shows how important communication really is all around. Thank you. So just a lot of, hopefully, your colleagues are on, so you can share the thanks, but we really do want to thank you and all of the agencies you work with for keeping us all safe. So thank you so much. I think that wraps it up for question and answer. Thanks for joining us. We will see you all on September 13th for our next Science Pub from Home, which is the cascading impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on wildlife. The registration is in the link, and it's also, you can find the information on our calendar page at sbnature.org. David, thank you so much. Everyone stay safe, and we will see you around. Bye for now.
All right, thanks.